Hi, everyone, and this is the weekly briefing for Cloak and Dagger. We've got Albert, Marco, and myself, Tony Nash. We are talking about Iran. We are talking about oil, and we are talking about the dollar. So, Albert, what are your thoughts? Let's start with Iran.
Something happened in Iran? What?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Um, you know, First of all, I was actually wrong with whether Israel would attack Iran, especially with looming inflation issues, in my opinion, that's coming and attacking Iran and threatening the oil trade industry and so on and so forth. I just didn't think that Trump would green light it, but he did. And the Israelis, I mean, just absolutely dominated Iran's defenses. I mean, it's a joke at this point. And uh, hostilities are probably coming towards an end at the moment. I think that Trump's been backdoor talking to the Israelis to simmer things down before it gets a little bit out of hand and triggers inflation to the point where they can't control it anymore. Talking about like oil going to like $100 or $200, which is just
Sure.
nonsensical.
It doesn't make sense given the supply in the market, right?
It's not even just that. I mean, knowing what the Fed does, knowing what the US does in the futures market, talking about $100 oil is just unrealistic in
Well,
my
if we had $100 oil, it would force the Fed to cut, right? Wouldn't it?
but it would, more importantly, it would trigger inflation later on down the line. And you can fake the data so much, but you can't fake it when everything is going up.
Yeah.
But that's I think we'll talk about that in a different topic. But
Yeah.
concerning the Iranians, Um, where's the Russians? Where's the Chinese? Where's the Turks that all these World War III proponents have been saying we're going to come to their aid and World War III is going to be triggered?
This
Where
is
are
what's interesting, Albert, to me. We've known in my lifetime, Russia has always been the backstop for Iran. And in the last 10 or 15 years, this BRICS thing, supposedly, China was going to come to their aid. And what we've seen over the last few days is they're absent. So they are all talk. Anybody who is, especially a Chinese ally, they can count on nothing. If anything happens to them, they cannot count on a single shred of support. The Pakistanis were Chinese allies until they got into it with India last month, right? And so, did China come to their support? No, it was the US who intervened to stop that. Has China come to help out India? Maybe with some words, but I've heard about Russian missiles being on planes to Iran to support them, but I haven't heard anything about Chinese stuff going to support the Iranians. So China is the absent ally in all of this.
yeah, the China's the big loser in this. I mean,
Yep.
they look weak. Their cheap oil supply is getting demolished at the moment. Uh, their BRICS story and being a competitor to the United States is completely fallen apart. I
Yep.
mean, this is something that you and I have talked about for a
In
long time.
5 months, Albert, like all this, pardon me, bullshit about the BRICS and about China for the last 10 years, um, we've seen it fall apart in the last 4 months.
We've seen it completely fall apart in the last 4 days. Like there
Right,
is
exactly. Yeah.
the Iranians are asking the Saudis and the Omanis to talk to the U.S. to stop Israel.
Yep.
Where are the Chinese naval assets, or where are the Russian air defenses?
And the Qataris. They're also talking about Qataris. Don't
Yeah,
forget,
yeah, yeah, of
Qatar said
course.
they would put $1 trillion into the US over 10 years. So all of a sudden they become very important to the Fed, to the
Mm-hmm.
Treasury, to the president. Plus, it's our largest military base in the region, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
have the Omanis, you have the Saudis, and you have the Qataris all coming to the US to practically beg them to get Israel to stop. We're never going to see that on, or we're not going to see that on the news. But we know that's happening in the background.
Yeah, it's just words. The Russians, the Chinese, the Turks, they have just words. Words
Yep.
in the media that spin up people, and these generals like McGregor and these other frauds, geopolitical guys that keep talking about World War III being triggered and the Straits of Hormuz being blocked and the oil going to 200. Now let's just make it clear. The shipping goes through the Omani waters, right? The Omani waters, if they were blockaded by Iran, would trigger a GCC defense pact, which would cause U.S. to intervene also on behalf of the Gulf states.
So
The
wait,
Iran,
so before you go on, the GCC does not include Iran, right? That's Saudi,
no,
that's UAE, that's
yeah,
Oman, Qatar,
of
right?
course, yeah. So
Yep.
it would trigger a defense pact, and the Iranians can't even protect their own skies at the moment. What makes
Exactly.
them think that would even contemplate such an action where they would block the Straits of Hormuz, where
Yep.
it would handcuff their own oil exports on top of that?
Yep. So it appears to me that the biggest long-term loser to this is China. Iran, I'm not sure yet. I mean, we've seen the second tier of leadership and largely the third tier of leadership really taken out. Like the Israelis showed us that they did this with Hamas, and they've done it partly with Hezbollah. Now they're doing it with Iran. So can the Iranian government recover from this?
Because the Israelis are not really taking out the theocracy. They're not taking out the clerics. If they really wanted regime change, they would have went for shock and awe, right? And they're not. They're doing precision strikes against the IRGC, right? Let's just be realistic here. I'm favorable towards the Israelis, but realistically, they get tens of billions of dollars a year from the United States,
Of course.
right? Mainly because Iran's a problem, right? So why would you eliminate that cash cow? I certainly wouldn't, right? If I was the Israelis and I'm looking at our bank accounts, I'm like, yeah, well, $20 billion is worth living with the Ayatollah or the mullahs here
Sure.
and there talking nonsense as we decimate their entire defenses.
Right. So, I've seen, I mean, these like war dog bros who are just all over social media this weekend cheering on every explosion. I mean, it's really pathetic. These guys are talking about regime change and all this other stuff. That's very Washington consensus neocon type of stuff. And
That's
I
the
just
same.
don't,
It's the same guys, Tony, that were talking about Wagner going marching up into Moscow and taking over all of Moscow and
yeah,
deposing Putin. These guys are losers, right?
yeah,
They don't know what they're
exactly.
talking about. They've never stepped foot in any of those countries. They've
No,
never been in a conflict zone,
never.
right? And they
Yep.
and they and they listen to and they spin up these financial bros that think that
Yep.
like numbers and charts actually mean something to geopolitics.
And I just want to be clear, both you and I have been in conflict zones. We
Oh,
have been.
plenty.
This is not foreign territory for us. And a lot of these guys, it doesn't matter how many images they get, what language they can speak in terms of, armed forces language or whatever. If you haven't been in a conflict zone, you have no idea what it's like. And when you have someone suicide bombed less than a mile from you, or you have some explosions half a mile from you, or the car next to you, or something like that, it puts you in a very different headspace than just looking at data or looking at film or something like that. So until a lot of these kind of warmonger bros can actually stomach that stuff, they're just a bunch of fools.
Yeah, it's not. It's the same thing as like Formula One, right? You have these AI computers that give you simulations of how to go fastest around the track, but hilariously, they're wrong because there's different dynamics that drivers do that charts and computers just can't deal with. And a
Yep.
lot of these finance bros and geopolitical guys, sit in an office and look at charts and talk to third and fourth tier bureaucrats and make these assessments that are wildly wrong,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Wildly wrong.
It's like China experts who talk to academics, and that's how they're experts. It's
Yeah.
all these like third derivative, second derivative kind of expertise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so where do you think things go over the next 2 weeks? So it sounds to me like you think the bombing is going to stop within a few days. So Iran, then the government kind of heals, I guess, but they're kind of already dominated. So then Saudi becomes the predominant power in that region. So this becomes a Saudi-Turkey kind of wrestling match in the Middle East over the next decade or so, since Iran is muzzled.
Yeah, I mean, the Iranians, like I said, they've already reached out towards GCC members to talk to the United States to get Israel to stop. I think Trump has already probably told the Israelis to simmer it down. Let's not get things out of hand, spiral out of hand. I think the hostilities will end in the next, 3 to 7 days, depending on whatever face-saving measures the Iranians have to pull off.
Right.
Um, right. So at that point, I think that the Iranians will come back to the table with Trump. Trump will declare great deals are happening,
Total victory, great
total
deals.
victory. Yeah,
All
yeah,
that
well,
oil is going to be on the market, on the free
yeah,
market instead of embargoed.
yeah, exactly. And then oil probably tanks to like the 40s by the end of the
A
year.
couple
You
weeks,
know,
right? I mean,
I mean, listen, I've warned all these oil bulls, don't mess with accounts that don't have to report losses. That's
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway from that. And you can think of whatever you want to of what I just said, but that's just the reality of it.
Okay, before we talk too much about oil, I want to just uh, kind of take a minute to talk about U.S. foreign policy. So we've got a Russia that is kind of toying with the U.S., but they're kind of neutralized a little bit now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of I wouldn't say separated, but I would say they're less on the side of China than they were a few months ago. Does that make sense? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that would be fair. I mean, I think they're starting to see the light of the at the end of the tunnel on sanctions and
Yep.
making hard decisions of whether they continue being a junior partner with the Chinese or just say the hell with it. Let's reapproach the West, and I think
Right.
they're on the verge of reapproaching the West.
Right. So you've got a Russia on the verge of reapproaching the West. You've
Mm-hmm.
got a Pakistan who just had the US help them negotiate a peace settlement with India.
Mm-hmm.
So Pakistan, formerly steadfast partner with China, but less so, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have an Iran that is now effectively powerless, that's probably going to demand some elections or something like that. And so China's, aside from North Korea, China's allies are kind of on the ropes, right?
Yeah, I mean they were never really strong to begin with. I mean,
Right.
concerning U.S. foreign policy, the only reason the Chinese even had a perception that they were strong was because of the lackadaisical foreign policy across the world from the Biden
Right.
administration. Right, they step back and pushed leftists that were actually anti-American to begin with,
Yep.
and the Chinese stepped in and took advantage of it. Right,
Yep.
but however, as geopolitical world becomes problematic and chaotic if you don't have a legitimate military force with logistical capabilities globally.
Right.
You have no voice in the room. Look at the
Right.
Europeans are
Nothing.
nobodies,
Yep.
right?
They're
They're
nobody's.
nobodies.
Yep.
Nobody listens. Nobody cares about what they say. Nobody cares what the Chinese say in Africa at the moment, right?
Nope.
After seeing all this, nobody
Or
cares.
Latin America.
Or
Nobody
Latin
cares.
America. The only thing the Latin Americans do care about is that the Chinese keep buying their fruits and vegetables and
Yeah.
commodities, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
about it. But that's different.
And I have to say, and you may disagree with me, but credit to Marco Rubio. I really didn't think he'd be a great Secretary of State, but so far, I think the State Department probably has more clarity than they've had in 30 years or something. Like I have no idea, but they seem to be disciplined and they seem to be focused and effective. Do you see it the
Well,
same way?
yeah, I do, and a lot of that has to do with them firing and getting rid of like the cancerous bureaucrats that were on the ground in the State Department in so many
Yep.
nations, right? And I've been a vocal proponent of that for so long,
Yep.
right? And they actually, and I'd like to see even more, but they've done quite a lot. So
They had 88,000 staff at the start of the Trump administration. I don't know what that's down to, but they could halve it, and I don't think we would see that much of a difference in what the State Department does.
yeah, exactly. Like I've always said, it's a postal service for delivering messages, not really for conducting uh, decision making processes for the White
No,
House.
it's DoD and the intelligence community that
Yep.
really do the diplomacy for the US.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so let's move on to oil because just in case people don't know, Albert knows a lot more about the oil market than I do. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and we're going to kind of figure this out. So the Israelis have not hit Karg, which is where the vast majority of Iranian oil cargoes go through.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they will?
No, I don't think so. All right, I think that's a red line that Trump probably laid out to them beforehand, saying, don't screw up the oil trade. Don't inflame the Persian Gulf, right? And I understand everybody's worried about it because what happens. Of course, it's not a 0% chance that things can get out of hand, but the Trump administration extremely concerned about inflation. Does not want to see the oil trade in the Persian Gulf get disrupted, and all of a sudden you're talking about 120, 130 oil, which would be catastrophic for the economy.
Yep. So, and I don't know, something like 80% of Iran's crude exports go to China, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, a lot of, on paper, that's correct. But realistically, it's probably a little bit less because a lot of the stuff gets mixed in with the Iraqi Iraqi fuel, right? And with the
Okay.
Iraqi papers. And there was articles about that.
Does that happen in Basra or Sharjah or not
It
Sharjah?
happens in Basra. So what happens is like they have trucks that go through routes that kind of cut through Iran because of just the way the roads and the terrain is. And then all of
Sure.
a sudden, like when a refinery has 1 million barrels a month capacity is exporting 2 million, you kind of got to chuckle a little bit,
Right.
But I mean, it's nothing that's not known for like 30 years.
No, we act like it doesn't
Yeah,
happen,
but
but
everybody
people,
knows this
yeah,
happens, right? And a
yeah,
lot of the oil majors will be like, "Oh, we don't touch that stuff." Yeah, I guarantee you do, right? I guarantee you touch that stuff. I know guys on the ground. You have bought Iranian stuff. It's just you don't know it,
yep.
right?
So when this started, I heard people say, oh, this is the death of Chinese energy supply chains or crude supply chains or whatever. Unless
Nah.
they hit Carg, it's not gonna harm China at all.
No, I mean you got to understand that China was buying, on this oil dip in the 50s and low 60s. China was buying head over heel. I mean, they've got Sinopec has got massive storage in the Southeast
Mm,
Asia, right?
yep,
Out of Singapore and whatnot. So they've been accumulating oil for quite a long time. So they're not stupid. They understand how the world works, regardless of what their state media say, regardless of what their propaganda
sure.
operations on social media have to say. The reality is they know that they're a second and third tier player in the world and they have to prepare for it. Oil being one of those commodities that they stockpile.
Yep. So do you think oil is range bound, meaning maybe the 70s? Are we going to see the oil in the 80s or 90s?
I don't think it'll be the 90s. I mean, you might touch the 80s, right? But it'll be shorted to oblivion at that point, me included. I mean, I shorted it the other day, um, over the weekend. I'm like, this thing's not going to last. And lo and behold, it was down 1.5% today. So
Right,
I took
exactly. Yeah.
advantage of that and
Yeah.
took my profits.
All these guys over the weekend expecting a 10% rise in
Oh
crude.
man, they were
It's
talking
funny.
$100 oil by the end of the
Yeah.
week and stuff, and I'm just, I just sit there and laugh at this
No.
point.
I mean, this thing happened over the weekend. It was a weekend war, right? So,
Yeah, it's
okay, let's
amazing.
talk about the dollar. You published a piece over the weekend talking about Treasury activities and issues with Treasury issuance, and we talked about the dollar last week in a different piece. Tell us a little bit about the Treasury piece that you published, and then let's talk some dollar dynamics.
I mean, the Treasury piece was typical. It was really talking about the non-issuance of bills, right, and the long bond and whatnot. Come to find out that as long as they don't issue bills and then leverage those bills internally, they can generate up to $1 trillion a year in stimulus off the books. Right. This is not congressionally approved or anything like
Right.
that. They get a free $1 trillion. And
So
and
let me explain that from a nerd perspective. Okay. If Albert's the US Treasury and he says, I want $10 billion in Treasury bills issued. When Albert issues those Treasury bills, he takes $10 billion of cash out of circulation, right?
Mhm.
But if you don't issue those $10 billion, but you're scheduled to, then you leave that $10 billion in circulation and that adds to the money supply. And with that, that's a loosening, it's a kind of de facto loosening of money supply. So when you don't have a cooperative Fed, it's one of the actions that you can take to have looser money supply. Although it's incremental bit by bit, it's not the waterfall of cash you would get with some Fed activity. Bit by bit, it does add. Is that the
Yeah, that's
thinking
exactly
generally?
right. But bit by bit ends up being $1 trillion a year, right? And I mean,
I'll take that.
yeah. I mean, shit, hell, just give me 10% of that for for advisory for advisory fees. Yeah, so that's what it is. And concerning the dollar, Bessent knows that controlling the dollar is the most important element in his arsenal for inflation going forward, right? But also lowering the dollar stimulates the markets to a certain degree. So they have it at 97 today. I think it was at 97.3 last time I saw. I don't think it can break 95 really. If even, I mean, they're pushing it to try to get lower, right? Um, but come the fall, I do still think inflation might be a problem. So, and on top of that, you're going to have to worry about the media coming out and saying Trump's destroyed the dollar's purchasing power and this and that. And okay, but this is playing on Trump's ego, which has shown that if you trade against it, you're going to win. And I just think that at that point, you're probably talking about another surge of the dollar back to like 101 on the Dixie. right? Telling
Okay.
you, I'm telling you,
So
bank
you think
on
we're going to go down to 95, then surge
I
back up to 101, then in
yeah,
the spring we'll go back down to 95.
yeah, I don't know if we'll get to 95, but that might be their target. Even breaking 97 is a little bit difficult. I'm certainly going to go long the dollar at 97 and probably double at 95, but I expect it to go back over 100 within the next 6 months.
Interesting. Okay. Very good. Well, we'll see what happens. It's going to be an exciting week, right? This thing may be over this week. Hopefully it's not a Russia-Ukraine thing. What are the chances are that you think this becomes a protracted conflict like Russia-Ukraine?
No, it won't be because the Israelis understand that the world doesn't like them, right? And they're losing, and like their biggest fear is losing support domestically in the United States. And as this thing drags out, they certainly don't want to be scapegoated for inflation, right? And they don't want to be scapegoated as warmonger. So they're very, very keen on understanding that.
Yeah, and I talked to a bunch of 20-year-olds, 20-some-year-olds this weekend. They don't want to serve in Iran. So,
No,
they want the US supporting Israel and Iran. So, that's a real thing for them. I don't want to serve in Iran, but I'm way too old for that.
no.
So,
The other thing I've been like meaning to discuss with you and that I'm watching now is who's going to be the Fed chair, right?
oh,
Because
right.
yeah, because
You think it's going to be Bessent or
I don't know. It's a possibility, right? But these announcements come out before Thanksgiving, which should be
okay.
talking about now, right? They'll be talking about it internally now.
So that's a
Right?
12, is that a 12-year appointment?
It's a 4-year appointment.
Okay.
Yeah, 4-year, but it's like offset, so it's like not.
Okay.
And then so that'll be discussed and announced before Thanksgiving, which is not that far away, right? We have July, August, September, October. It's 4 months to go through all these candidates, and
Who do you think it's going to be? Lutnick?
oh my god, please no. I mean, listen, I'm up for it. If you guys want to nominate me, I will absolutely. I will do what I need to do. But I don't know. I mean, it could be Bessent, right? I just don't know who the Treasury Secretary would be after that, but it could be him. Right now, I'd probably give him a 30% chance, highest chance to be the Fed chair. But it's 4 months away, so let's see what names come out there.
What about Trump's buddy who's his envoy to the Middle East? Do you think he might get it as a kind of a reward for being the chief negotiator?
That's a tough call. I mean, it's certainly going to be someone that's loyal to Trump in some certain manner, right?
Absolutely.
And will entertain cuts, right?
I mean, look, if you watch Best in front of these congressional hearings over the past few weeks, I mean, he's definitely towing the line, very much towing the line.
Oh yeah, of course.
Trump. He is not, there looks to be zero daylight between him and Trump. So if it's an audition for Fed chair, I think he's doing a great job. Will he get it? I have no idea, but he seems to be doing a great job.
I hope he doesn't. I'm not in favor of the guy, but that's just whatever.
Hey,
right.
let's see. I mean, October, it's right around the corner, but it's also
Yes, it is. We gotta start talking
it's
about it.
also a long time from now. So
Yeah, but nobody's talking about it right now, and that's
yeah.
probably the most significant economic policy change decision that Trump's going to be able to make in the next.
Okay. So let's ask our viewers, guys, who do you think the next Fed chair will be? Let us know. I'd love to kind of take a few of them and maybe do some analysis. Maybe we'll write a piece on the people that you guys put together and look at their chances. So before you end it, please go ahead and like and subscribe to like the video, subscribe to our channel, subscribe to Cloak and Dagger in the URL below. And we always interact with our subscribers on the website. So please go ahead and comment on our stories. And Albert, thank you very much for your time and have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks.